Hey guys, Joseph Babaifa here this evening. Hope everybody's having a great evening. We're going to go ahead and talk about La Letra Del Año this evening for the year of 2020, right? We recently came out with a video about Yemaya in our Odisha series, and it's gotten a great response from a lot of people. And first and foremost, one of our viewers recently asked about my opinion and my interpretation of the Odu that was revealed this year in Cuba, in what is known as La Letra Del Año, or the Odu of the Year, right? The annual reading for basically Earth or the New World, right? Before we get into the specifics about the Odu that was revealed, we're going to go ahead and talk about the ceremony in itself, known as La Letra Del Año, right? Or the annual divination of the year for basically Earth. It's been done in Cuba for quite some time. I mean, when the original Babalaos were first brought over during the slave trade, they continued this custom in Cuba as well. And some of the first Babalaos who actually were involved in it, one of them was Remigio Herrera, Adesiona, Awoniorumila Obaramegi, and his godson, Bernardo Rojas, Irete Untedi, also continued this ceremony as well. And up until it was in the hands of Miguel Febles, who was basically synonymous with this ceremony till this date, where the ceremony actually carried his name and his Odu Odika, and was held in La Casona, which is basically a house where this ceremony was held in Havana, right? And for years it was done like this, right? In Cuba, up until recently, there were two letters of the year. One was with the Casona of the people who were associated with Miguel Febles, and our brother Lázaro Cueta, Iwori Wofun, has directed it for quite some time and has done a wonderful job. And there was also another Letra del Año, which was done by the Folkloric Association in Havana for Yoruba culture, right? And it was handled previously before the current president of Manolo Beyono. It was held by Castañeda de Ogbe, right? Manolo, being a godson of Lázaro Cueta y Wofun, ultimately came to the conclusion that it would be best for these two letters of the year to join together and be able to provide Cuba, as well as the rest of the New World and the practitioners of the Afro-Cuban Ifa, one letter to be able to guide themselves by. And up until now, it has been this way with these new, communications and relations that have basically been reinitiated between these two men. So the letter of the year is in various Odu of Ifa. Three come to mind, myself. And it takes a lot to be able to do this, right? There's a lot of previous ceremonies that are involved, a lot of sacrifices, a lot of steps that are done to be able to pull out this letter, because for it to be a letter that really governs the world, it takes a little bit more than just the average divination that's done on a person-by-person basis with the Ifa Oracle, right? My interpretation of the letter of the year, I'm a fan of it. It's very interesting. It's a very, global event. It's a beautiful thing. There is another one that is much more traditional. Within the traditional Ifa, the new year is not in January, it's in June. And this letter or Odu is taken out at Okeitache, which is basically the Mecca of Ifa, right? Orumila's home. And this Odu also carries, obviously, a very heavy weight as well. So when we're talking about the two letters and which ones we go by, ultimately, it really is your decision. I've noticed that they tend to not contradict themselves. They usually kind of fall in line with each other, and they're both very legitimate. So it's very important, no matter which system you practice, to follow that Odu, understand it, understand how you're going to be able to interact with the world, right? My personal opinion as well is that even though the letter of or the Odu of the year affects everyone, being that we all cohabit the earth, it's very important for each individual person to get their individual divinations to understand how they're going to be able to live within the world, right? Yes, Heather, I've seen that they are very similar. I believe in Africa last year it was Oturamei, and now it's coming with Ogunda Ogbe. A lot of similar themes, right? And believe me, this is not by coincidence, right? So Olodumare knows what he's sending us, and Odumila knows what he's revealing to us, right? It's also very regional, right? Because you're going to see that depending on the proximity to the letter of the year that you occupy, you're going to see a lot of those things occurring. But usually it's between Africa and Cuba, being that these are the two meccas of our faith, right? So that's one thing. So we're going to go ahead now that we've given a little bit of background on the ceremony in general, the specific Odu that was revealed this year. And the specific Odu that was revealed this year is Ogunda Ogbe, also known as Ogunda Bede, Ogunda Biode, or Ogunda Bilariawo, right? Very popular Odu of Ifa, and we're going to get into all the different aspects of how, positive it is and what it really entails. But when I was asked by one of our viewers to talk about how I felt about the letter, in my opinion, and how I felt like it was going to affect us, I wanted to touch on some specific themes. Being that I am familiar with this Odu, I've studied it. And it was very apparent to see what the sign was talking about, right? So unfortunately, when we're talking about the letter of the year this year, it's tough. It's touching on some difficult topics, right? And it really talks about the need for ethical character, and an honest approach towards life and an honest conduct as we progress through this year and as the world progresses through this year. Because unfortunately, Ogunda Bede. Hey Jordan, Iboru Boya. No, thank you for watching. Definitely we have to go ahead and touch on the letter of the year so we see how things are going to go ahead and progress. Thank you so much for watching. Unfortunately, Ogunda Bede speaks of corruption and theft. It is an Odu that touches on some difficult topics, right? Even though it has some very positive things that we will get into. The first thing that, unfortunately this Odu is sometimes associated with is corruption and theft. And the real reason here, or the reason being we can interpret this here, is because this Odu, unfortunately, was where the Babalawos, or the priests of Ifa, basically began stealing, or they dedicated themselves to an illegal lifestyle, right? So first and foremost, we can interpret whenever Ifa is talking about the Babalawo, we're talking about a position within the religion that is prestigious, that is one that's held to a different moral standard, right? So the same way we could be talking about the Babalaos, who were the judges, who were the political figures in that time period, we could also be talking about modern day politicians, people of influence, people who occupy a space within our society that are going to have an effect on how we live our day-to-day lives. And in my personal interpretation, it's talking a lot about politics, politicians, and public figures, right? And unfortunately, in this sign, the Babalaos were thieves, and they were involved with corruption, where Ifa is kind of pointing towards possibly within or on a global sphere, public figures getting involved in corruption, and specifically with the motivation to garner more income, right? So that's a negative thing, but this Odu definitely talks about it. And another thing that was occurring in this Odu is that the Babalawos were in conflict, right? They really couldn't come to a common ground on how Ifa should be practiced, right? So from a political standpoint, it could be talking about just really different viewpoints on how things should progress from a political standpoint, but from a religious standpoint, it really calls on religious elders and practitioners to really come to a common ground when it comes to practice. We're not saying that everybody has to practice the same thing, but there has to be an understanding of the various methods with which we could be practicing Ifa, right? On an interpersonal level as well as a global level. Ogunda Bede is kind of saying that unfortunately Ifa is somewhat in disarray right now, where one person thinks we should do it this way, another person thinks we should do things this way, and because of it we're in conflict and we're really not coming to any conclusions as to how to proceed. And ultimately what it could end up doing is destroying the fabric of the religion in general, right? Definitely talks about government. We touched on the stealing or the theft, the corruption, not touching on common grounds. It speaks of the importance of the religious elders coming to terms with how things should progress. Another thing that could be occurring is, luckily now with the information age and all of the different mediums that we have to be able to educate ourselves on Ifa, we're seeing a lot of new concepts enter into Afro-Cuban Ifa from our traditional brothers, and a lot of them are really great, right? I incorporate quite a few, and I've seen some really positive results from it. I think the most important thing is that we're open-minded to the things that we feel comfortable with, and aren't quick to discourage people from trying new things, and at the same time aren't quick to deem things correct or incorrect. The most important thing, like I said beforehand, is that we're being understanding and, we're opening our mind and allowing things to take place in a constructive fashion, right? Because once again, this Odu speaks of the Babalaos having a misunderstanding or differences in opinions as far as practice go. And what ended up happening is it confused the neophytes or the people who are learning about Ifa, because when leadership is in disarray, usually the public is as well. And this also happens from a political government standpoint. When we look at our government and we look at this institution that's supposed to be protecting us and providing for us, and we see that, things like corruption and theft and, unethical behavior are occurring, it causes society to kind of come up in an uproar. And these are the various themes that Ogunda Ogbe or Ogunda Bede unfortunately speaks about. So definitely something we have to be careful with, right? Another aspect of this that really, reaffirms that this Odu is definitely talking about government and, the influence it has on us is that this Odu was identified as the Odu that would represent Olofin on earth. So when we look at the word Olofin, within the Afro-Cuban tradition, it's very associated with the word God, right? It was ultimately used to identify the concept of God, right? When we actually break it down and really translate it, the word Olofin means governor. It means owner of the law. Olo, afin, or ofin, right? And, it's speaking of whomever occupies this position has a huge influence on society in general. So whoever we elect, whoever we choose to represent, government law, has to have the ethics and the character to be able to do so. So this Odu is making a real call to all the people occupying that position to conduct themselves accordingly, right? And the need for leadership, the need for ethics, the need for understanding and conversation and consideration of all those involved, politically and religiously. Because as we recall, religious figures in ancient Yoruba times were also political figures. I mean, if we look at the Oni or we look at the Alafin, they hold religious rank as well as political rank. So when an Odu is talking about these kinds of positions, it's usually referring to both. And as we look at the political climate, on a global basis, unfortunately, there are situations and, places that are suffering from this. So Ogunda Bede is touching on this, definitely, right? Ogunda Bede is an Odu that really calls for the need for humility to be able to achieve unity. Unfortunately, one of the big obstacles that we're going to experience this year on a global standpoint is egos that are going to kind of interrupt us being able to come to common ground and progress, right? From a political standpoint, from an influential standpoint, a lot of people have different viewpoints, and because of it, them thinking they're right or having opposing viewpoints, it's really going to impede progress because they're not going to be able to come to a common ground, right? So Ogunda Bede says that we need to be humble, we need to accept, interpret, be logical to be able to find the positive concepts within our, our opposition or our, other parties' viewpoints to be able to progress. Because if we don't do this and come to a compromise on a common ground, we're going to find ourselves in political standstills, shortages, all of the things that ultimately affect the working class human being, right? And the reason I say this is because in this Odu, the Babalawos were able to come to a conclusion as far as their feud or their dispute by sharing and eating the hens of Orumila together, right? In this Odu, it's identified that the Babalawo should consume the hens that are offered to Ifa as well as the practitioner of Ifa to consume them as well. So by them offering to Ifa, by them coming to a common ground and, performing Ifa rites together, regardless of what their origin was, and eating together and sitting together and conversing, we were able to achieve a better good or a greater good and a conclusion. So it speaks of the need for humility for unity, being that they were able to accept each other's form of practicing Ifa. They were able to come to a common neutral ground, such as the etera or the mat or the table, what have you, and have constructive conversation where Ifa is saying that the people or the influences that be need to sit down and really come to a conclusion on how they're going to progress, because these decisions affect the globe, right? So we talked about the Bawalaos reuniting. It also calls within this Odu to, how you doing, Anthony? Definitely, Heather. Iwapele over ego. Definitely the good conduct and the good character will always trump ego, because ego is it's a product of impatience. And when we're patient, we have good character, right? When we have someone who's willing to sacrifice somebody else's needs for their wants, that's when we find ego, because they put themselves before, the community and the greater good, right? So it speaks about the act of eating the hens of Ifa. It speaks of the need for the practice of religion, for, the faith of Ifa to propagate more, for people. Hi, Hazel. I believe who's reigning this year is my mother Oshun, who you see behind me. So she definitely plays a big role in this Odu as well. And it's really great that you touch on that. Ochun plays a very huge role in this Odu, and I would say she's one of the most important Orisha within it, right? Hey, how you doing, Ricky? Boruboya. This is one of the Odus, even though Obeyono speaks of it as well, which is Ogunda Ogbe or Moya, or the same sign flipped backwards. This also speaks of Ochun being crowned, or going through her initiation rites. So it speaks of the call for the practice of religion to be able to achieve higher grounds and social progress and lifehood progress, which is what Ochun needed here. Ogunda Ogbe, unfortunately, was where Ochun participated in some unethical behavior to be able to crown and become a person of influence, which kind of falls into this theme, because if we analyze a pataki of Ogunda Ogbe, this is the famous Odu, which has the famous story of where Ochun, unfortunately, was very poor, right? And due to Ochun's poverty, she used to have to wash the same clothes over and over again in the river, which began white and ultimately turned yellow, right? When she found herself in this state of poverty, she went to see Orumila, where Orumila told her she had to do ebo, basically with the little bit of money that was left, right? Being that she was in such a difficult position, she said, you know what, I have nothing to lose, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And when she did that, and she offered sacrifice to Eshu as well, who's a very important deity here, Orumila gave her the advice that the next day she should go to the town and pick up whatever she saw at people's doorsteps at noon. Now, it was really interesting because unfortunately the townspeople never really paid attention to Ochun, being that she was poor and being that she was not crowned, or she did not occupy that social status that the others did, right? So what ended up happening the next day is Eshu, at around 11:58 or 11:59 a.m., went running through the town disguised as another man, so that he wouldn't be recognized, saying and screaming that there was a monster coming through the town. When people heard this, they were looking for solutions, and they said, hey, what do we do to protect ourselves? And Eshu, in his disguise, said, you need to take all of your money and all of your prized possessions and put them at the front door, right? The people said, fine, then what do we do after that? Well, you hide until I say otherwise to make sure you're safe. Everybody did it. So when Ochun came strolling through the town at 12 noon, as she's walking through, she's just seeing these bundles and bundles of money, and she just started picking it up like Ifa had told her to, right? So by 12:01, she was gone. She ran through, got all the money, and left. Now, based on Orumila's wisdom and based on his advice, he told Ochun the money or the blessing or whatever comes to you next after doing ebo, you have to use it to be able to consecrate yourself in Orisha and fulfill your destiny. Orders and advice which she followed. So 7 days later, 8-9 days later, what have you, she came out in the state of Iyawo, or dressed in all white, and she walked through the town, and people recognized her and said, wow, you crowned Orisha? She said, yeah. And they asked her, and they said, well, where'd you get the money to do that? She was like, I did it both. Right? So it's a really interesting story, and it kind of touches on what Ogunda Ogbe is speaking about in general. It speaks about social progress, right? It speaks about social consideration. It speaks about us as a society considering everyone, and our government considering us, right? Or our social spectrum considering us. Ochun was very poor here, right? And she felt like she had a need to be able to do whatever was possible to be able to live a productive life, where we as a society, being that this Odu is speaking about the world, it says that as a society, as a human race, people are finding themselves in a position of poverty or, social lacking, and are looking for any option to be able to progress. And unfortunately, in this Odu, it ultimately was a criminal act that led them to do that. So, never to excuse anybody doing anything negative or unethical or illegal, but, we have to put people in a position to not feel like their government is not supporting them or helping them, which is what Ogunda Ogbe is saying here. And Ochun, being mistreated by society, and hopefully this is not a reflection of society, she chose to go the other route and ultimately steal to be able to occupy a certain social status. This could be referring to certain politicians. This could be referring to certain political figures, social figures having done dubious things to be able to achieve their position, and now things are coming to the light ultimately. And Ogunda Ogbe speaks of this. People occupying social and political positions when in the past having done things that were less than ethical, right? So this is going to be a recurring theme in this Odu. And, luckily Ochun was able to accomplish her goal, but it was at other people's expense. So, this Odu speaks of that, right? So we talked about, putting egos to the side, the need for, the public as well as religious houses. Oh, yeah. So when things like this occur, and like I said beforehand, when religious elders or public figures are not on the same page, it causes disarray within, society. So this is another thing that the Odu is saying that we have to avoid. This Odu also touches on natural disasters, such as earthquakes, which are unfortunately happening in Puerto Rico right now, and a bunch of other places on Earth, right? And the reason it really touches on this is because Ogunda Ogbe is known as the Odu of the whole, right? Or where the earth opened, which is ironically what happens in earthquakes. We have tectonic plate movement, and we might have an opening, a sinkhole, any of these things occur, and Ogunda Ogbe speaks of the opening of the hole. And ironically, it speaks of the opening of the hole in the form of the grave, where holes could be opened and ultimately cause people harm. Unfortunately, when an earthquake happens, a sinkhole, natural disasters, you could have a really catastrophic event on your hands. And Ogunda Ogbe speaks of all these things. So it's already taking into effect, unfortunately, in our island of Puerto Rico. Being it's such a close neighbor to Cuba, it's really, interesting that it got affected that quickly. And in Puerto Rico, the Odu this year, if I recall correctly, was Odu Of The Year, that speaks of, the home falling apart, the bone structure of the body falling apart. It speaks of things breaking down and falling apart. So they're living that aspect of the Odu, unfortunately, right? In this Odu, we also have to be very careful because it also touches on public health scares. And it touches on them in the aspect of public health as far as food goes, food hygiene, bacteria infections to large amounts of food. The reason I say this is because in the Odu of Ogunda Ogbe, it speaks of when the pork or the meat of the pig or the swine became infected and ultimately hurt the person, right? So Ifa says that we have to be very careful with the quality of food that we're eating, make sure we're cleaning everything, make sure we're not eating anywhere that's doubtful, make sure everything's up to standard, because unfortunately the stomach and the body were infected through eating a bad piece of meat here, right? Where Ifa calls on, the limiting of eating certain foods with these kind of characteristics. And it's really food in general. Just make sure your food's clean, all of these things, because it speaks of health scares from a global, national standpoint that have to do with food, bacteria, and hygiene, right? I found a couple proverbs in this Odu that really, I feel, reinforce what the overall theme of the Odu is talking about, right? In this sign, there's a saying that says, one man with the help of Ifa can challenge 30 men and defeat them. What I was able to interpret from this was that this touches on the need to follow the commandments of Ifa, be in the constant search of Iwapele, or good character, and also respect the natural laws to always be in harmony with the universe and receive their support when facing the unjust treatment anyone can encounter in today's religious and political climate. So Ifa says that it does not matter if 30 people with an intention to do harm or anything unethical group together against one person, as long as that one person maintains good conduct, character, and ethical behavior, they will be able to overcome the group that is doing things the wrong way and trying to overcome what is right? So I think this is really, the one person can be kind of interpreted as the working class human being. Anyone or minorities or anyone who feels like they're not being taken into account, right? And as long as you are right and you are doing what is ethical and logical, ultimately things do come to the light. And it speaks heavily of this, right? Within this Odu, it speaks of people doing things in their past to be able to attain power, and ultimately it coming to the light how they were able to achieve it, right? So not good for them. There's also a saying in this sign that says, if a slave dies, his mother is the only one who cries for him. If a free man dies, the whole world talks about it and grieves for him. This is the unjust law of men. This is once again touching on political and social climates where some people are being viewed as more valuable than others. Who are the slaves or the esclavos? It's once again the working class, minorities, maybe even soldiers. This is an Odu that speaks of war, aggression, and sacrifice, where Ogunda Ogbe is an Odu that speaks heavily of the sacrificial process to be able to effectuate our religion, right? It's also one of the most important Odu, where as such, our religion does not function without the things that were born in this Odu, right? Specifically the Ebo, specifically the sacrifice that takes place from time to time. Very important. So by nature, unfortunately, Ogunda Ogbe is an aggressive Odu, where there are going to be physical encounters, conflicts, and possibly, war, unfortunately. And we're talking about slaves, I guess in this case, we're talking about soldiers to a certain degree, because, some of the decisions that are being made, some of the climate that's happening on an international scope between, maybe our country and others in other parts of the world could really affect all of us, right? And unfortunately, without us having much of a say in it, and especially those men and women who defend our country, right? And it speaks of people, innocent people, being put in harm's way due to government decisions, right? And them not being recognized for their sacrifice. So pretty tough themes that this Odu is speaking about. There's another proverb that says, honesty is the best policy, or honesty is the best politic. It speaks of, once again, referring to corruption within the powers that be, right? Politics, politicians, people having dubious, precedence when attaining power or influence within society. It says, what we don't see today, we will see tomorrow. Once again, it speaks of things coming to the light after things have been done in a secret, unethical fashion, right? It says, he who laughs last, laughs the best, right? We have to pay attention to who is going to be around at the end of these various scenarios that are happening on a global scale, right? It speaks of political and public figures being prosecuted for illegal activity. It also speaks of people losing their positions and being replaced. We as a religious community, we have to make sure we never fall into these kind of conducts, right? So it speaks of that as well, right? Unfortunately, this Odu speaks of on a global scale, people suffering personal losses due to death, right? Unfortunately, death is part of the natural biological experience as us as human beings, right? And people die every day, unfortunately. But Ogunda Ogbe says that, unfortunately, before the year is out, some very influential, some very key people may pass away, not only on a global scale, but within our lives. And unfortunately, I went through that experience recently, and with my grandmother passing away. So unfortunately, I've lived the Odu up until this point in pure flesh, right? And I'd like to take a moment. Rest in peace, Mama. We miss you. Prepare yourselves mentally for that, family. Try to spend as much time as you can with family. Be around your loved ones. Be around the people you learn from. Be around your mentors. Tomorrow is never promised, and Ogunda Ogbe is a solemn reminder of that, right? Ifa says in this Odu, he who knows Olofin will not be the poorest man. So it touches on, once again, on the needs of the working class not being taken into account or considered by the government. When we look at the word Olofin, meaning governor, and this Odu is saying the poor man will not meet the governor, it means that there's a disconnect between, this part of society and the working class aspect of society, when it should be the complete opposite, when the needs of the needy are heard by those in power and influence to be able to make their lives better, which is what government is for, right? Absolutely. So Ogunda Ogbe, just to touch on the positive aspects of it, like I said, it's one of the most important Odus in Ifa. It's a beautiful Odu when it's lived in the positive aspect. Ogunda Ogbe has to be very careful to always speak in a very, courteous manner. Unfortunately, Ogunda Ogbe has translations where it says that Ogunda Ogbe speaks in a way that is offensive. So if this is being spoken of on a global scale, it's really making a call towards everyone to interact on a more courteous, fashion with each other. And I think ultimately this will, calm a lot of things within society. When we have political leaders who speak however they want to anybody, it's going to give off this impression that this is the way things should be. These are the people we look to as examples, right? So unfortunately, Ogunda Ogbe speaks of that. In a positive aspects, it speaks of the achieving of goals, growth, promotions within life, right? Becoming more influential in each of our respective communities. And in that aspect, it's very positive. So Anthony, I really appreciate the offer. Everything helps. And definitely, whatever you want to, learn over here about Ifa and Orisha, we're coming out with videos very frequently. I just came out with a video about Yemaya, and we're going to be coming out with one about all the deities, within our knowledge, right? So definitely, just want to check, make sure we're getting on everybody. Absolutely. And Ogunda Ogbe is a wonderful Odu. Ochun comes reigning this year. She's a very important Orisha in this Odu. Definitely one we want to take care of and be attentive towards. Obatala, I believe, is also assisting her in governing this year. He represents the judge. He represents the governor along with Odudua, who is a very important deity in this Odu. So, thoughts from an overall standpoint, this Odu is just saying that we have to really pay attention to how our governments are interacting here, making sure, everybody's needs and wants are being taken into account, not allowing egos of those in power to really influence us or our nation to really get involved in things that aren't necessary, right? Is it difficult to start with your deities? Not at all. Quite simple, right? To be able to get involved in Ifa, at least in the Afro-Cuban tradition, there's a lot of spiritual undertones that we usually do as a preparation for formal initiation. The first thing that anybody should receive within this practice is the hand of Ifa, to really identify who you are, who your guardian Orisha is, what your life Odu is, and from that point forward, see whatever Orumila and your guardian Orisha have in store for you, to be able to move forward in this path, right, which is a long and beautiful one. As far as with this Odu, it really is that. Speak well to people, treat people well, take everyone into consideration, don't allow our egos to interrupt constructive conversation and progress, and peace, right? And, really working hard for what it is that we need. Transitions throughout life to be able to occupy better spaces within it through hard work and effort. Ogunda Ogbe teaches all of these things. Ogunda Ogbe must be studious of Ifa, must put effort into Ifa and into life, and he really does see the recompense of that. I have some very good friends who have this Odu, and they've lived it beautifully, right? And it really is a situation where things can go however it is that we want them to go, right? Chola Ndoki, thank you. I really appreciate that. We try to keep things, accessible here, because when we're talking about Ifa's beauty and its wisdom is in its simplicity, right? Sometimes there's an Odu known as Ochetura that says that Ifa is so simple, even the wise complicate it, right? Or get confused. So we have to really break things down to their simplest form, find the common thread as interpreters of this oracle that we are, and really use this information to help us live better lives and interact better with each other. This is the reason why Ifa was left to us, to give humankind the knowledge and the information to be able to interact with each other and live better, right? And also interact better on a global scale with all of us, because Ifa definitely is a global religion, right? Guys, I sincerely appreciate you guys watching. To all of our viewers, please make sure that we go ahead and go to YouTube and subscribe to Joseph Baba Ifa YouTube channel. And all of these videos will be available on there for future viewing. Definitely, if you haven't had the chance, please like Joseph Baba Ifa page, as well as Botanica Candles and More. We are open every day of the year except for holidays. My wife made sure that I said that, right? Because holidays are holidays, right? A lot of great things planned for this year. And I hope that this information helps you guys, know how to interact better with the year. Please make sure you get your beginning of the year consultations to know how this Odu is going to interact with not only your Odu, but, the one that, you're living this year. And, guys, thank you once again, and God bless all of you. Blessings, family. Take care. Onareo.